Dan Munro is a confidence coach, best-selling author, and co-creator of Brojo, the international self-development community for men interested in living in integrity. His mission is to model and teach the art of living with complete honesty. His books, Nothing to Lose, The Naked Truth, and The Legendary Life, take you on the hero's journey to a life free of the behaviors, deceit, and falsehoods that we perpetuate in our life, thanks to our conditioning, our fears, and the falsehoods that we've bought into. They allow us the opportunity to create an authentic and unstoppable life by claiming back our personal power, designing the life that will bring us satisfaction and happiness and release our true potential. And I can't think of anyone better to invite to share his wisdom at this retreat, drawing from his own hard-won lessons and his expertise as a confidence coach and decade-long research into the psychology of confidence. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining us. And today we're going to dive into discussing about people pleasing as a behavior that stems from a set of limiting beliefs. So I'm excited to get started. So thank you so much for joining us. So Dan, tell me.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah.
No, you're so welcome. So tell me why people pleasing behaviors don't always work out so well. So what's the challenge with people pleasing behaviors?
In a nutshell, they backfire on the person. It's kind of the tragedy of them. They're strategies that we come up with in childhood, or in some cases late as teenage years, to deal with difficult social situations and difficult emotions. And they sort of seem to work at that time. You know, if you're a child, you've got this immature brain, you're not even fully developed. You've got, say, an emotionally distant father or an emotionally smothering mother, or maybe both, or the opposite combination, something like that. And it's just really hard to deal with and really anxiety provoking. You come up with a little strategy. How do I make everybody happy so that they back off and so that I feel safe? And turns out if you do everything that impresses dad and you do everything that makes mum feel like she's special or whatever, you tend to get treated better. And so a strategy forms. And so people pleasing, really, it's a strategy of survival for a young person in emotional distress. The problem is we don't realize it wasn't actually working back then. It was like dealing with the symptoms, but not with the problem. You can't, if I've got an emotionally distant father, pleasing him doesn't make him suddenly become emotionally available, right? It's not actually working. I get more pleasant behaviors from him or less negative behaviors from him. And not only does it not work very well back then, but what little amount of it does work kind of reverses when we hit adulthood. That's the case most of the time. So the thing that made everybody love us when we were kids now just attracts narcissists or puts people off or keeps people at a distance. And that's the key theme, really, is that ultimately people-pleasing backfires. You end up creating the thing you're trying to avoid. If you're trying to make people come close to you, you end up lonely. If you're trying to make people like you, you end up people sort of resenting you for being fake. And on. The list goes on and on and on. You try really hard, you get very few results. It's just on and on and on. And that was my life. That was a huge part of my life. And I was lucky enough that it worked so poorly that I had my crisis kind of relatively early compared to, say, most of the people I work with, like mid-20s. I'm like, man, this is really not working. I'll try anything else because this is just a dud. Like, everything I want to happen is not happening. The reverse keeps happening. But unfortunately, a lot of people, it kind of works. The person who's kind of liked at work, so they feel that they're popular and they get a lot of approval from people. And yeah, sure, they never have a deep, intimate relationship, or they don't really like themselves when they look too deeply, but everything's ticking along kind of nicely and comfortable and safe. These people can drag this out for decades before their crisis. The crisis is going to hit.
Yeah.
But it might take a long time because it doesn't hurt enough yet, I actually lost track of your original question because I like to rant. But
yeah, no, I'm quite happy to keep going with this because I was lucky enough to read some of the chapters of one of your books, and it talks a little bit about how we can really hold on to that because there's almost this illusion that it works sometimes. And so because it's
Mm.
worked occasionally, there's always the hope that it will work again. So can you just talk a little bit,
Mm.
and maybe that's more apparent to you now through the work you do with your clients, but why is that? Why do we delude ourselves that it's worked very rarely and it might work again? So it's better to hold on to that behavior than to try something different.
Well, we're falling victim to a couple of very common and frequent human biases. You know, one of the, I think the most important is what's commonly called the fundamental attribution bias. Long story short, we credit the good times in our life to people pleasing,
Right.
when really it was just correlation rather than cause and effect. It just happened to be happening at the same time. And often it was in spite of that that we had a good result, not because of it. But we look back as like, I was very, very nice, and then my boss gave me a promotion. If you look carefully, you might be seeing the boss gave you a promotion because for once you stood up for yourself at a meeting. And that's the real reason you actually stopped people pleasing for a brief breath of time. And that's what got you over the line. But people pleasing gets the credit, when actually people pleasing is the reason that your career took this long to progress. You know, or somebody be like, oh, I was really nice to this girl and when we were dating and now she's my wife. And it's like, yeah, but you're in a fake relationship where you have to try hard to be something you're not all the time. That's not a win by any means. And so we get this constant, like, the bad things that happened to me were either because I briefly dropped the ball on being nice and got punished for it, or because the world's unfair. And even though I'm being nice, I'm not getting what I should get. Is that kind of thing. And then everything that went good is because I'm a good person, people pleaser, this narrative.
Yeah.
And it's usually just very much the opposite. And the second bias, of course, is just the sunk cost fallacy. We've invested in this for so long, we're scared to pull out now. We're scared, it's like the person who puts 100 grand into crypto and it bombs, and they're like, oh, I'll put in another 100, this time it'll work. Instead of just going, maybe I need to invest somewhere else and just cut my losses. People are very, very bad at doing this in general. It's a human nature thing. And so when you've been invested in being this personality, this pleasing personality that you created in a time of trauma in your younger years, and you worked very hard to make it work, and you've been trying to make this thing work for decades, it's difficult to go, wow, that really doesn't work. I need to just bail on it completely.
Yeah.
Not just difficult, for some people, impossible. They would rather cling to a crappy identity that doesn't work than admit that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's tragic. Absolutely tragic to watch that happen.
Yeah, I saw a quote not long ago, and it was something along the lines of, the person you need to be to thrive is not the same person you were that you needed to be to survive. And that's kind of the
Yeah.
grow up, step up, stand up piece that I think as adults we get the opportunity to kind of question what serves me best now. But it is interesting about how we kind of hang on to these things, these behaviors that, as you say, we kind of created a persona and a personality around that. Can you just say a little bit more about that? And again, this attachment that we might have to being, as a people pleaser, always nice to people, always doing the right thing, and not wanting to challenge other people or be that person that stands up in a meeting and questions or challenges, or to your family or to your siblings or whoever. So could you just talk a little bit more about that, about how hard that might be for someone who's been a people pleaser all of their life?
Yeah, well, I think it starts slowly as just individual compartmentalized behaviors. Like maybe you start getting good grades at school because that stops dad from being angry occasionally. And it's just in a separate behavior, and then the rest of the time you're you, playing with your friends and so on.
Yeah.
And then one of the friends picks on you in front of people and embarrasses you, and you figure out how to like do witty, sarcastic comebacks when somebody does that instead of showing that you're hurt. And so you add that to your arsenal. And before long, you're doing these little tactics more than you're not doing them. And I think the transition is slow, or for some people, there's an instant jump if like they land in a new school and they just suddenly become this thing that they just made up on the spot sometimes, But most of the people, I think it's just something bad happens, strategy. Something bad happens, strategy. Until one day you're all strategy. Nearly all of your social interactions are tactical. It's like becoming a chess master. You've got a counter move for every move that they do. You've got opening game. You've got all these different, and you just become like a robot. You just play this role. I talk a bit about in the book. It's there's some study done into, what do they call those actors who constantly stay in character?
Is it method
There's a
acting?
name for it. Method acting,
Yeah.
right? The study showed that, like, for a lot of these people, their personality actually changes after the role. They kind of take on a bit of the character permanently, and it can create psychological crisis. There's some theory like Heath Ledger committing suicide after doing those Joker movies, like the darkness got into him. There's kind of some theories like that. Anyway, I think people pleasing is essentially you put a lot of hard work into creating this almost flawless character that sails through all these difficult social situations, coming out clean on the other side. And most of, like, I actually ended up, with my work with nice guys, I ended up sort of making these categories because I noticed these kind of archetypes coming through. Like, my one was a performer, so my general process for dealing with things was kind of to show off, which is either being really funny, being really interesting, or being really good at something. So I took the spotlight and kind of put on a performance that won everybody over. And it's just, I guess, being extroverted by nature, that's where I kind of led towards. Whereas when I work with introverts, you might get, say, the wallflower who just tries to fly under the radar everywhere, just not get noticed, because only what gets noticed gets judged. They just agree with everything, they just hide, they never speak up. Whereas if two of us are at a meeting, there'll be me like, I've got another idea, with this other person full of ideas, just be like, oh, please don't look at me. And we're both actually coming from the exact same insecurity. We just got different strategies, just luck that we chose different strategies. And I think the reason for the investment is because you imagine you build up a big social world where everybody thinks you're this thing.
Yeah.
The idea, even just the taste of the idea of letting them know that they've all been fooled, that you've essentially been deliberately and consciously manipulating them, making them dance to your tune, which is what people pleasing really is. It's not being nice to people, it's manipulating their emotions and their image of you very carefully. To admit that, the imposter syndrome of that, to go, by the way, I'm total fraud. Like, you have no idea, even you as my best friend, you have no idea who I actually am, and here it is, and it's way worse than I led you on to believe. It's just all the real stuff. Because I think people pleasers at the heart, caused by probably problems with neglectful, abusive parenting or bullying. This idea, if I just go to my 0 point, just me, neutral, with nothing added to it, there's no worth to that. There's no value in that. I'm not interesting. I don't provide anything. I don't contribute. One of the hardest ones for me was to stop being funny, essentially. Funniness was something I added. I got a knack for the comedy of kind of telling stories and taking the piss. I was kind of like Chandler from Friends, that kind of character, very sarcastic and always got a quick comment for everything and kind of annoying people with it. When I took that away, it felt like cutting off an arm. Like, I can't function without this. I can't even have a conversation without turning something into a punchline. That as soon as something got serious, I just have this crawling sensation like, fucking make a joke, because I just didn't want to get intimate. I didn't want this thing to get real. I can never let a conversation get anywhere near serious. But it was because of an underlying belief. Like, if I stop being funny, people are going to be like, why do we have this guy around? What's the point? He doesn't add anything. And I think it's the same for, say, the opposite side of the spectrum, the people who hide. They're like, if they see how crappy I am, they're not going to want me around. It's better they just don't notice that I'm here, essentially. And that's ultimately the core of people pleasing, is starting with this idea, I had to add something to who I am to be of any value, to be appreciated, to be loved, to be accepted, to be not hurt. And if you take that away, I'm nothing. I'm worthless. And so why would somebody willingly give that up and go to that place? Like, oh, by the way, I am worthless. Judge me now. It's very hard for someone to actually take that risk.
And a lot of people watching are high performers, high achievers,
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether they're there because by their own natural talents they're high performers, or because they were pushed as children to achieve and the expectation was there, or, you know, once they achieved they couldn't afford to stop achieving, or the careers they've gone down, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what you have to do, or even if they get a kick out of achieving. There is a lot of people I know listening, because I know the audience and I know the different industries that they come from. There's a lot of imposter syndrome out there. And actually, a lot of the clients that I
Yeah.
work with, there's a lot of imposter syndrome out there. I think there's way more than we give credit to other people as having. Um, and I
Mm-hmm.
really did enjoy reading your discussion of that in the book around it's another form of people pleasing, and that piece of, if people realize that there's actually less of me than this um, imaginary kind of persona that I've created to hide the real me, because I think the real me isn't actually as worthwhile as the persona I've created. I think, you know,
Mm.
every imposter feels I'll be discovered for being less than. So yeah, I think that a lot of people relate to what you're saying, is what I'm trying to say. So let's just touch on how you said it was, you know, your skin was literally crawling when you had to not use your one-liners and fall back on your
Mm.
humor. So what was your process? I mean, obviously you came into awareness that this wasn't working for you and a shift was needed for you to get more enjoyment and fulfillment out of different areas of your life. But how did you actually go about shifting it for yourself? What was your process?
Yeah, well, it wasn't like an overnight thing. It was very gradual. Key changes as I sort of identified the worst areas that needed to be fixed. What's worth, I think, speaking of prior to that, given the nature of your audience, is it was actually a high achievement that set off the alarm. I got really good at doing stuff, and in particular was a job. And I got to that. Yeah, there's actually studies that show you get to about 75K a year, and money stops making you happier. You know, and I'd hit that line almost to the dollar, and felt it. I was just like, oh, another promotion, yay! Like nothing. Whereas before I'd be like, man, I am rolling in it. And now it just didn't feel like that was just baseline. Now I'd feel like I was suffering if I went lower. But it was about that, and I was really highly regarded. I used to work for the Department of Corrections, and I was seen as like the go-to super guy. You know, I'd made this name for myself, which was earned through achievement, but also definitely cultivated
Right.
on my part to be as glowing as possible. And I got there, and it just didn't feel like as good as it was supposed to feel. I had quite consciously achieved what I thought was success, and arrived there and gone, "Oh, is this it?" It's like 3 stars when I was expecting 5, kind of thing. And at the same time, my social life, especially my love life, was just in the toilet. Like nothing was happening. I felt like an alien on a different planet in that space. I didn't even know where to start. Even though, and the worst thing about it, I look in the mirror and look at myself and go, there's nothing obviously off-putting or creepy or weird about me. I can't answer why this isn't working for me. And everyone I talk to can't answer it. They always say, why are you still single, whatever.
Yeah.
I can't point to something and say, oh, it's because of that thing on your face or whatever, like something I could at least hold on to. It was just, I'm pretty regular. I should be at least having regular results, and I'm not. And that just started to create this pain, is the only way I put it. Specifically chronic insomnia. I couldn't sleep. And I just spent a lot of time wishing for a different life, but not really even knowing what to wish for.
Mm.
And chasing things, but not really knowing why I might be chasing girls, for example, and going, do I even know why I like this girl? Why am I doing this? I might even get into a little relationship with her and just be like, I'd rather not be here. What am I doing? I just don't understand anything, and it just started to get very painful to be me. And at the same time, or for a number of years, I'd been starting to get little pockets of feedback from people who saw through my bullshit. And I credit this as being the most helpful out of all the things that have happened to me. Is occasionally somebody could see through my mask. I was very good at acting. I can't emphasize enough how much I had everyone fooled. Everyone thought I was genuinely confident. I'd be the least confident person in the room, and they'd be turning to me for advice on how to be more confident. Like, I had them fooled. But not everybody, and particularly not genuinely confident people, because they can see through stuff like this. In fact, to them, I'm obvious.
Right.
And I remember, like, for example, I gave doing self-deprecating humor. That was kind of my trick. Again, very Chandler from Friends, poor me. And a girl said, "Oh, that's pretty pathetic." The only negative feedback I'd ever received on that kind of humor, but it felt like it was the only accurate feedback I'd ever received. And then I had another. I wanted to be in this kind of like super team at my work that only the stars got into, and the boss basically said, "Well, cut the shit, and then we'll talk about it." I was like, "Oh," and he was like a super confident, like very kind of alpha dude, not in the douchebag sense, but in the like king sense. And he basically just called me out. I was like, "Yeah, stop pretending, and then we'll talk." And just every now and then I get feedback from people I respected, feedback that seemed undeniable, feedback that was far more like insightful than all the praise I was getting all the time that I felt nothing about or actually felt like resistant to. And it all sort of coalesced to one point where I go, the one thing I know for sure is that I'm absolutely full of it. That's what I know. I don't know what part of that doesn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work. I even have a genuine sense that other people are doing it too, and I'm not alone here. But at least I know what the opposite of that is. And this is actually a kind of a technique I teach to my clients, is if you're unsure of a belief, do the opposite, the exact opposite, just to get some data points from a different side of the graph, because it's usually somewhere in the middle. But so I was like, well, one thing I'm not is very, very honest. That's one thing I'm definitely not ever, except with, and this was a key thing, a couple of best friends that I'd had almost for my whole life, who I never, for some reason, I just felt safe with them from the beginning or something, and I always totally took off the mask around them. They knew everything. They even knew about me putting on the show, right? They knew a lot because they did it too, and it was just our little secret club,
Yeah.
And it took me ages to realize they're not an exception. They're the only intimate connections I've had, and they're the only people I've been honest with. Maybe that's a cause and effect relationship. Whereas everybody else I'm dishonest with, and it always feels superficial. It always feels like... I saw an interview with a psychopath a few months ago, and they said that they feel like a gas that just fills up the available space, but they don't actually have their own form. And I was like, I know that feeling. I'll just be whatever you need me to be, but I don't actually exist. But I didn't feel like that around these friends who I'd say things that I'd be too scared or embarrassed or would be sure would get bad reactions. To them, I wouldn't hesitate to say these things. So I asked myself, like, well, what if I applied that outside of them? And this, again, a very gradual process. I talk about some of the key events in my book where I just set myself a little goal to be honest where I usually wasn't. One example I use from the book that was a big life changer for me was I heard people gossiping in the lunchroom about somebody who wasn't there, and they're saying pretty nasty things, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. Like, I'm really anti-gossip. I hate that. Ironically, from a dishonest person who talked about people behind their back all the time. And so I just said, fuck, go for it, And I said, okay. So I just stopped them, and big awkward moment, and just said, look, guys, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't say this if they weren't here, so it's probably not cool to be saying this stuff. And it was exactly as awful as I thought it would be. The whole room went silent and looked at me, I'm bright red and my heart's in my throat. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to get a new job, And anyway, and then they started going red. And I realized they were embarrassed for themselves. I could see it, like they were ashamed to be called out. They were just, probably one person was okay with it and they had instigated, and everybody else was just going with it. They were all people pleasing. And as I talk about in the book, maybe as soon as I left the room, I was the next target. I don't know. But I just remember leaving the room and I actually did the fist thing. Like, yes, like I finally did something that I can actually look in the mirror. I probably slept like a baby that night for the first time in years. Like I finally said the thing that I never say. And it just became a series of events like that. I just kept looking for another, like one that I could handle. What's another one? Maybe I stand up to my boss. Maybe I tell a girl I'm attracted to her. Maybe I discontinue a friendship because the person annoys me. Maybe I tell people about what I'm interested in that I think that they'll judge me for. And it's just these so many. If you're a people pleaser, you could write a book on the things you haven't told people about, from like events to thoughts to feelings to preferences and desires to disgusts and political stances, a billion things you never talk about. And you just pick one that you can handle and you have a crack. And I guess it's kind of like I talked about the formation of people pleasing being these strategies being implemented one by one. This is kind of like the reverse of deconstructing them one at a time. This little area, be honest there. This little area, be honest there. Until you're more that than not. And it will show you over time a couple of things. One is that you being honest, which is you just being you with nothing added to it, is valuable. And actually far more valuable than any bullshit you've been coming up with. Like the real product beats superficial, off-the-shelf stuff every time. You've just never tried it.
Yeah.
You've never seen, how do people react when I'm really opinionated? How do people react when I stand up for myself and others? How do people react when I tell them how I really feel about them, both positive and negative? And you'll see you're going to have bigger reactions, both positive and negative. So you're not going to be liked by everyone. You never were anyway. That was an illusion. But now people who don't like you are going to really not like you. They're not going to be like, oh, I can put up with Dan. They're going to be like, oh, God, Dan's here. Get me out of here. They're going to be really anti you, which you won't care about because you didn't like them anyway. You just thought you did. And then there'll be the others who think you're awesome. And you won't even be able to accept it because you're like, I'm just being me. Like, it's like you're walking around in your sweatpants and somebody says you look hot. You just can't really comprehend that that's what they would prefer, but they do. And I'd be like tired and talking to someone. I'd just be like, oh, I'm so antisocial and tired right now. And they'd be like, God, I love that you can say that. I'm like, really? That's your favorite bit? I thought that was like my worst bit. And you just can't comprehend that actually you've been hiding all the best stuff this whole time. It's going to break your heart when you see the truth. When people like you for like effortlessness, you just say whatever I think, whatever I feel, and people are like, man, this guy's awesome. And you're like, how can you think that? Because you always thought you had to put so much effort in. But the thing is, you're putting effort into making people who don't really like you.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're distancing yourself from people who would have loved you for free.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that in so many areas of, authenticity in leadership, authenticity in friendship, in family relationships. It's so much easier and less exhausting to be authentic, and it's so much more rewarding because you are attracting people that they appreciate you for you. But just building on that, so obviously you tried these little experiments which give you data points, which give you confidence to try another data point and another opportunity to test it out. But is there and you might have found this a little bit easier than others may, but what about that self-acceptance piece? So if you started in a place where you thought that the real you wasn't worth very much, is there a step where you have to go, actually I appreciate me, and I'm gonna express me, I'm going to risk expressing me because I think it's worth expressing me? Or is it really just that recognition that the alternative isn't working, so you may as well try the opposite and see what happens? Where does this?
Yeah, I think it kind of starts with the latter.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The reason you don't think you're worthwhile is because you've been keeping it a secret. It went in that order. First, you started lying, then you lost your self-worth.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize this is a cause and effect relationship. The best way to describe it is imagine that you were doing this to someone else.
Yeah.
Every time someone went to raise their opinion, go, shut up. What you got to say isn't worth sharing. Don't share it. You'll just piss people off. People won't like you if you say that. Stop it. Imagine if you did that to like a child.
Yeah.
Every day, dozens of times per day. How confident is that kid going to be in 10 years? Right? Especially if you then rewarded them for being fake as well, on top of that. Imagine that system playing out. the beauty of what I've been talking about is this is not for other people. Self-acceptance doesn't come from looking in the mirror and going, you're good enough, because your brain goes, no, you're not. And you're just provoking that argument.
Yeah.
And it's an argument you can't win because the pessimism in you is bottomless. It can always find something to complain about. What you can instead do is do exactly what you need to do to a child that had been bullied that way. Encourage them to speak up. And this was the thing that really got me hooked on honesty, is how thrilling it was. And it took me a long time to realize that thrill was waves of confidence that I was briefly I didn't even use the word confidence in this journey until a couple of years in, because I didn't know what that word meant. Nothing to me. It meant someone good at something, which is something else. That's competence.
Yes.
Confidence is somebody who could do something they're not good at and do it boldly, you know? And like if I went and say a big deal for me was attraction and letting people know how I felt about them in general, but especially letting women know how I felt about them, because that's just a source of pain in my life for so long. I remember the first time I did that, just went up to a total stranger and just said, I want to say hi because I think you're gorgeous. Something like that. It was the opposite of all my programming, which said that was disrespectful, it's harassment, it's abuse, you're a bad person, you're sleazy, you're a scumbag. All my programming said that. But I was in this phase where I'm like, I'm going to do the opposite of what my programming says, because my programming sucks. And I'll just take that risk. So I said this to her, and I'm ready to go to prison, right? I'm like, I'll accept whatever happens. Like, my life's so like unenjoyable that I'll just, at least I'll know I tried. At least I can write it off as an option. But her smile, that's all I remember. Nothing happened with her. It didn't go anywhere or anything. She just smiled. Huge smile. The exact, like, of all the possible scenarios I was like prepared for, it wasn't a positive one. You know, I wasn't even, I was like, if this happens, I'll run. If this happens, I'll apologize, you know. But then she smiled. I was like, oh my God, she actually likes that I'm attracted to her. That changes everything in my whole life. It changes everything. I always thought me being attracted to someone was some sort of imposition on them, some sort of burden that they'll have to deal with, because the amount of times I'd finally said to a friend that I'm attracted to, and she's, oh, you know, it looked like a burden for her to have to deal with it. And I misread it as I left her way too late kind of thing. Anyway, so like, as soon as I saw her smile, it wasn't so much about her. It was just I'm glad I got a smiler the first time around. Not everyone smiles, right? Yeah. But I got a smiler the first time, and it just clicked. Like, I was just so proud of myself for doing it. I don't need a good result to feel that, but when it's your first go, it's nice if you have a good result first, because, you know, you're very vulnerable. But I just walked away, and I couldn't even remember what she said. I didn't care that nothing went further with her. This wasn't hitting on her or anything. I was just, for months, I've been trying to make myself do this and had been too scared. And I just drove home, like I flew home, you know, I was just floating. And what that feeling was just the absence of self-loathing for a little while. Just finally, the guy I wished I was and the guy I was being the same person for once.
Wow, that's wonderful.
You know?
Yeah.
That's what honesty does, is it closes that gap. You be the guy, you know, the amount of times you've lain in bed just going, I should have said this and I wish I'd done that. Or be the person who said that and did that.
Yeah.
There's no gap left. There's nothing to think about. Like, you can't say, I wish I had, because you're like, oh, I did actually, so that's done.
Yeah.
And that's self-confidence, is that absolute relationship with yourself where who you are and who you want to be are the same exact person. And honesty is the bridging of that gap, in my opinion.
And that's, you know, so I quite like to talk a bit more about that honesty, because that's what people at this retreat are looking for. They're looking how to flourish in their life in alignment with their highest self, their highest potential. And they feel that they have got some blocks. They've been trying, they're committed to their self-growth, but for whatever reason, things haven't unlocked for them. And I suspect part of that is that lack of self-honesty, that lack of not entirely, but there'll be a lot of self-awareness, but there's been some blocks there. So let's just dig a bit deeper into that honesty and what it gives you to be so honest. I mean, you've given a couple of examples there, but what does it unlock for your clients? Where have you been able to move people from and to? Or what's it going to unlock for their lives, and that what alignment are they experiencing in their life, and freedom, or sense of achievement are they getting out of their life that's real now, that's really, that gap's closed? Can you just talk a bit more to what honesty gives us?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, because a lot of people assume it takes away. You're going to lose all these results and gains. And in a sense, when you first, there's what I call the transition phase. It's the ugliest bit, where you go from being dishonest to honest, and you have to shake up the whole world that you're in, because everyone was sold on the previous image, and yourself as well, to see yourself become, for example, like one of my things is I ended up becoming a lot more like my dad than I'd ever hoped to be. As a teenager, I'll never be like him. And now I'm like, man, I'm like 70% like him, and just to accept that that's the truth about me is that, big shock. I'm a lot like the person who's half my genetic code, So there's this kind of element of accepting that who you're going to end up becoming might be something that you're currently against, but not for genuine reasons. You've been programmed against it, conditioned against it, and so on. I'm also married. I used to look down on married people. Well, they fell for the old medieval blah, 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 whatever. And now I'm like, oh, this is nice. Damn. I was wrong. There's two types of dishonesty. Self and outward facing, I guess, however you want to put it, internal, external.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, there's kind of two barriers to honesty. There's awareness. You're not aware that dishonesty is taking place. That's the internal one. And then there's courage, which is you're aware of what the truth is, but you haven't been saying it. You haven't been doing it. The first one, I don't know, we may later go into how it's done. But even if you aren't honest with others, at least knowing what the truth is, what that gives you more than anything else is a sense of what reality is. A baseline, a foundation to stand on. We might never know what the objective truth is. Is reality just a hallucination? I don't know. Who cares? Doesn't matter. You ask someone what that truth is, the correct answer should be, I don't know. But if you ask someone, what do you truly believe? The answer can't be, I don't know. That would be a lie. You do know. I saw Ricky Gervais was talking about this with agnostic people. People don't know if there's a God or not. And he said, you can say you don't know if there is a God or not, but you can't say you don't know if you believe in God or not. Because you definitely do or don't. There isn't a third option of I don't know. Right, yeah. You either believe in something or you don't. It's very clear. And you have to be honest with yourself. So being honest with yourself starts to give you form internally. See, the imposter syndrome, what's really underneath, even underneath the fear of being worthless, is really the fear of being nothing. Of not having form, of not being a thing. Of people pleasers quite often on the fence to protect themselves. Like, I can see both sides of the story, that kind of approach to conflict. They don't understand how much they lose taking that perspective, because what you're saying is, I don't exist. You can't place me on the spectrum. I don't exist. I see it all without being it. And that is just a very disconnected, unreal state to be in. It's like a purgatory where you're not here or there, you're in between. One of the first things you start doing is just being really honest with yourself. What do I like? What do I dislike? How do I really feel about that person? What's my favorite thing about myself? What's the thing I most wish was different? And every one of these data points creates like an outline of who you are. Preferences, especially what you like and dislike. From simple things like food and music through to complicated things like sex and politics. It's just becoming very clear on where you stand, even if you don't quite have the balls to tell other people yet, or you just can't see that going well for you. At least start with your own. Like, you might be in a meeting and the boss is droning on. At least in your head go, damn, he's boring. And just like don't try to moderate that. That's how you feel. Like, I am so bored. If I could teleport out of here without consequences, I so would. And just connect like, oh, that's how I actually feel. I'm bored and frustrated. That's actually how I feel. Even though my face says, oh, interesting one, Bob, or whatever. Yeah, inside, just like, why won't he die? If he just died, this would be so much easier, right? And just letting yourself, especially your dark side, it's like, I actually hate that thing. And letting yourself have that. Or I actually don't like the thing that everybody likes, and I like the thing that only weird people like. And just letting yourself have that thing. And then this will start to bleed out into courage. Like, okay, so who can I show this to? Or where can I play with this a little bit? Let's say, recently I started playing chess. That's why I gave that metaphor before. It's on my mind all the time. Now, in my high school, if you played chess, you went home with bruises, right? You do not play chess in the school I went to, unless you want to hide indoors all lunchtime, which they did. But I was always sort of like, I'd see them play. I played it a couple of times with friends or something, and I had a bit of a thing for it. Same with dancing. I had like, everybody thought dancing was gay, at my school, and gay people were bad and they got beaten up. But every time I watch the dance video, my body's twitching, like I'm having this like problem. Like, what is that? It's just my body going, you want this? I'm like, no, I don't. No, I don't, Anyway, so like when I started playing chess, I'm like, I'm a total geek right now. And that's fine, because everybody else here is too anyway. And as soon as you let yourself kind of be the thing, I guess the short answer, if we take away my long rant, the short answer to your question, what does honesty give you? You. That's what it gives you. It's better than the high paycheck. It's better than the approval from your audience. It's better than your boss thinking you're the best worker. It's better than the girls liking you or the boys liking you. It's better than that. And it's actually more beneficial for all that stuff anyway. Like, this boss might not like the real you. But if you go into the next job authentic and that's why they hire you, you're going to be loved for that. It's going to be very effortless. It's the same with relationships. Like, if you have to work hard to make your partner like you, wait until you get into one where you starting off as you normally are is what attracted them. Like, I often think of that 3-month period that most people go through where they put on the performance for each other. And then by the time they're committed, they're like, oh yeah, this is who I really am. Oh, rats. But I'm in now. I've got to try and make it work. I've got this method. It's a bit crude. With my clients, I call farting on the first date, which is, if you go on a date with somebody first time, you act as if you've been with them in a relationship for 10 years, which is to say you are real with them. So you don't try hard, you don't dress particularly different to how you normally dress, you don't talk about anything that you wouldn't want to talk about, you don't pretend to be interested in anything you're not interested in, and you just basically speak your mind as if you hang out with your best mate and there's no rush to get anywhere and there's no results to get. A relationship that starts like that can last.
Yeah.
But to get there, you might have to break up with your current partner. And this is the thing I really want to put out to your audience with it, because I don't want to bullshit them. If you want to switch over to honesty, yeah, you're going to lose some of the stuff you currently have. It might be friends. It might be respect from certain workmates. It might even mean changing your career. One of my clients went from one of the top IT engineers in the country. He now lives in a van, writing guitar music and a blog.
And I bet
that's what honesty did to him.
Yeah.
Couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
He was on like very, very high 6 figures plus investment properties and stuff. And now he like negotiates for petrol and shit. And he loves it.
Yeah.
Absolutely loves it. And he can always go back to IT if he gets short on cash.
Yeah.
But that's what it gave him. Whereas I've got other clients where externally their life barely vibrates, it barely changes, but why they do everything has changed significantly. So now when they're playing with their kids, they're way more attentive and they're trying to role model, whereas before they're just doing it because you're supposed to. Or, like one of my clients was working in a warehouse factory, very low level position, barely making minimum wage. And he's still working there, but now he's very honest with everyone there, and that's more than enough for him. Like, he couldn't even handle thinking about career right now. He's just trying to figure out how to talk about your feelings without losing your mind, So I can't tell you what it will give you externally. what I can say is in my experience is it will be what you really need. And it will take a while to get there, but it won't be what you think you want. It'll be what actually matches you.
Yeah.
It'll be what lines up, what's effortless for you, what isn't a struggle to work with, what reacts and responds very well to you, even at your worst. Like if you're in a relationship, you have a partner who love you even when you're depressed. If you're in a job, even if you hit a block, they'll want to work with that, and every idea you come up with is respected, and so on. That's where you'll end up. But if you're in a position that's very dishonest right now, if you had to put on a game to get to where you are, yeah, be prepared for that to get a bit shaken up. And if you don't want to shake that up, then don't go down this path, because you can't have both. You can't have honesty and smoothness.
So, I mean, really, we're calling for people to be radically honest.
Yeah.
And to start with experimenting with that, recognizing where they've been dishonest with themselves, and to experiment with being more honest with themselves. And that requires them to be more honest with other people. But the reward on the other side is well worth it. And I can attest to that, because even though I've not followed your method, I found myself doing it anyway. And for those listening, Dan knows that I grew up a people pleaser for some of the reasons that he mentioned at the beginning of the interview. Really to keep myself in an unsafe household, and a father that, had very, very high expectations. And as an adult, you find yourself, if you're not careful, repeating that pattern, assuming that the people in positions of power, you're going to upset them if you speak your mind, or you're going to upset them if you don't keep them happy. And you end up second guessing everything unnecessarily so. But I can remember one of the assumptions you can make, and I've hired thousands of people in my career, and you know how hiring goes, how people should present, what their CVs should look like, what effort they should make in their covering letter. They should have researched the organization before they present for interview, and they should be clear what they want and what they think they can contribute. But I actually started my shift by being really clear about what I didn't want. And the moment I started talking about what I didn't want, I started getting headhunters ringing me up. It was bizarre. It's like I started with what I didn't want. And then I created alignment with organizations that fitted what I did want. Even though I didn't really know what that was, I just excluding what I didn't want. And that was how I started that process in the workplace. And then, you just start doing more and more of that. And it wasn't necessarily a conscious journey at that point, but also in relationships, both with family and with a partner, you start to find your voice. And you think, I used to feel, I don't know if I said this to you before, Dan, but I remember actually seeing a counsellor before I moved to Australia, and she asked me, so I think I had to do this exercise, and I described myself like a chameleon. So you put on this performance. I was a chameleon that could change my colors, whoever I was with. I could adapt to any situation. What anything was required of me, I did it. But that alienates you from yourself, as far from you as you could possibly be. And I got tired of that. Like I wanted to be me, and I wanted to be accepted for being me. So I kind of arrived in Australia wanting to leave that shit behind, frankly. And I came here showing up as me, and I could rewrite my story. Like I could just leave that baggage behind and just be much more authentic and much more real. And it wasn't the first relationship, or it wasn't the first job that people were okay with that. It was the second one or the third one. But at least I kind of knew that that's what I needed to do and wanted to do. And I just stuck with it. And, life has kind of all fallen into place, and I've learned more lessons the more I've done that. And then I've refined my processes, and I kind of ended up a bit like your clients, where I've ended up doing exactly what I needed to do, and finding my alignment and my freedom and my joy just by making that choice, that being a conscious choice to drop the bullshit and show up I think I probably approached it from authenticity rather than honesty, but you've added another layer to that to now check. Just it's another check and balance that you can offer yourself. Am I being honest? I think it's a really neat thing to be able to do.
Yeah, because I think it's such a simple question to answer,
Yeah.
yes or no. And you always know the answer. If you're unsure, then the answer is no.
Yeah.
I think you've raised a really incredible point in the space of self-development in general, which is there's a kind of misnomer with self-improvement, which implies added addition. I believe in self-destruction, which is you remove what's been added to get back to the core. The coach, super coach, Neil, I've forgotten his name. I'll send it through to you.
Yeah.
I'm bad with names. He talks about we're all diamonds covered in horseshit, covered in nail polish. And this idea, you know, we added all this stuff, or stuff was added onto us, and then we try to make it look good on the outside. And the diamond's in the center. The stuff on the outside's okay, but it's not great. And that was a sense for me. I wasn't really doing anything new. I just stopped doing and allowed whatever was underneath that to be. So whatever genuine feeling came out instead of the moderated version I used to do, which took a lot of effort. I remember it's like I notice it right now. I do notice it every now and then. As I speak, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say. The vast majority of my life was the opposite. Every word out of my mouth was very carefully curated with all possible variables taken into account, 16 different universes extrapolated out, possible reactions and how I'd counter those. It was like running on the spot. You know, I'd look calm in a conversation, but I'm just machinery, gears turning, calculations. Whereas now, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I don't know how you're going to react. I barely care. Not that I don't care about you, but how you react is the best way for you to react. It doesn't matter what it is. It's exactly what should be, and I'll deal with that. It's very hard to... it's hard to show someone that. There's almost a leap of faith element to honesty, which is, yeah, everything's going to crash down and you're going to be so glad that it has, but you're not going to believe that until after it happens. The only way to sort of push that leap of faith is to ask, well, is your current way working?
That's right.
You know, is being fake everything it's cracked up to be? Are you happy? You know, do you look in the mirror and go, I don't want to be anyone else. This is it. Perfect. Or are you binge drinking on the weekends? Are you looking at porn? Do you feel like you're stuck in small talk, superficial conversations? Do you hear yourself at meetings going, is this my language? Is this how I actually talk? Is this how I talk to my friends? No. Why do I talk like this? You know, do you feel that tie around your throat just going, I would so not wear this if I didn't have to? And all these little things you notice where you're just like, there's a lot of I don't like going on in my life. For what? For why?
Yeah.
Because someone told you? Who was that person? It's one of the things like when I looked at who's conditioned me to people please and asked myself a simple question, did they have a good life? Were they a confident person? The answer is always no.
Yes.
I'm like, why did I let them teach me?
Yes.
Seems like I made a critical error there. Ironically, all the people who told me how to live, by definition, were lacking in confidence. The confident people were just like, hey, you be you, do
Go
whatever you
ahead.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't intervene, unfortunately. They couldn't, because confidence like prevents you from interfering with people. But all the people who had the loudest voices were the worst ones to listen to. But I'm a kid, what do I know?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I just, the word you've hit is freedom. People pleasing is a prison. It's watching your life rather than living it. You know, I've seen this. I had a vision once. I call it that. I walked past a couple at a cafe diner thing who were clearly on a first date. I've got like a nose for that, I guess. I could see it. And it was almost a kind of hallucination. I could see the two bodies talking to each other and pretending to be laughing about the menu and interested in each other's jobs. And I almost hallucinated these kind of like souls coming out of their body, watching this happen. The real people watching the two performances perform to each other. and just like desperate for connection. These real people, just lonely and yearning, nothing like the facade you're seeing. And I don't know, was I seeing micro body language or stuff, like all my coach training and everything? I'm so used to seeing what honesty and dishonesty looks like now. And I just felt like I was seeing the full picture. I was like, this is painful to watch. This is awful. They might be good for each other, but they'll never know.
No, because
Not
the
with this
mask is
going
on and the
on.
game is on.
Ironically, they're trying to connect on commonalities, but the thing they have in common is that desperate need to try. That's the thing they could connect on.
Yeah.
They could just admit, man, I'm nervous because, I've been single for so long, it's starting to get weird. If they could just start the date like that, this would be a totally different experience, probably a really wonderful one. But they've been told their whole life you can't say stuff like that. Well, to anyone listening, I'm telling you, yes, you can, and you'll be amazed at how much better it is. And you'll be amazed how much people look up to you when you speak like this. When you're the one at the meeting that says, I'm bored, when you're the one that says to the client, look, I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm a bit nervous, you'd be amazed at how good it is to say that for yourself and actually how effective it is to say it for your goals. So but you don't believe until you see it.
Well, I think also you only have to think to your own experiences of other people. So if you're in a meeting with someone that's really slick and has got all the buzzwords and seems like a salesperson, like, that they're just, you don't admire them that much, right? Because you can see through the falsehood, you can see the fakeness of it. So you only need to see that to know that doesn't feel real. And then the flip side of it, and I can remember when I was a young academic, I'd only just started my academic career a long time ago now, but there was a senior professor and he was so comfortable in his own skin and he would share his content so willingly and without pretense, without protection. The thing about academics is that they don't generally share very much because it's their IP. And he had no need to do that. Like, he was so comfortable and confident at that stage that he had nothing to prove. And you only have to think about, the reason I use that example, you only have to think about the people you admire, and they're those people. They're those people that are so confident and comfortable in their own skin that they have no pretenses. So yeah, even if you don't feel it yourself, you only have to look at others to see that doesn't work. That works really nicely. I relate to that. So if I try a bit of that, then maybe that will work for me too. And I just hearing your stories, I imagine the night that, as you say, when you flew home, having told that girl that you found her attractive and you slept you slept through the night, and some of the other things that you just dropped, you would have slept so well as a result after all that exhaustion of keeping up the performance. So Dan, I want to say thank you so much. I knew it was going to be a stellar interview. I knew that every word that you'd have to share would totally resonate with the audience because, we're all in workplaces where people are putting up a performance at times, and we've grown up in households where we've been conditioned. We've all got fears. We all lack confidence at times, and many of us have got imposter syndrome. So and I know I have been a people pleaser. So thank you so, so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. Thanks for joining us.